Welcome to this Digital Analytics Association webinar, How to Improve Marketing ROI Through Better Campaign Tracking. Thank you for joining us. My name is Deanna Morrison. I am on DAA's education team, and I will be the moderator for the presentation today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. In the Go To Webinar bar on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a questions area. You are welcome to submit questions at any time during the presentation, and they will be addressed at the end of the presentation. The slides are in the handout section, so please feel free to download these at any time during the presentation. The slides will also be shared in an email that will be sent out after the webinar, which will include a link to the recording. At the conclusion of today's webinar, we ask that you complete a brief survey. This evaluation will help DAA in planning future online events. We are joined today by our speaker, Ann Saylor, Senior Client Strategist at Claravine. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to Ann.
Hi everyone, great to be here with you today. I'll be providing some real-world strategies that you can put into practice to get better data from your campaigns, which will lead to more effective use of your company's marketing dollars. So before we start, I'd like to define the problem. What was our before state of tracking that we were dealing with, and what really needed to be fixed? And as we solved the problem of campaign tracking, what were the preliminary steps that we needed to take to set ourselves up for success? And how can those be replicated across any company? From there, once we solved the issue of campaign tracking, how did we put those insights into action? And what did that ultimately translate to in the course of results for the business? So I'll be answering these questions from my own perspective as an analytics practitioner, as well as some ways to apply this to any company's situation. So let's start with the problem. Campaign tracking can get very complex very quickly. In our case, we did have a defined format, and you see some examples on the screen here across a number of different teams. And did we have a general structure in place? Yes. Were people trying to follow that structure? Absolutely. But in practice, we just really didn't have very clean campaign data to start with. So here you have examples of different teams and the different types of formats that were coming through. And on the right, you have examples of how those might translate into different campaign metadata points. So there are inconsistent names for the same campaign, which makes the data hard to aggregate later. There are inconsistent types of channel names, in some cases not even a channel name at all. For product names, you see some different options here for the same product. Region names, some are NA for North America, some are US for US. And then platform names are also inconsistently named. So while this data is anonymized, not exactly the same data that we're working with, you can see that this inconsistent data can make reporting and decision-making very difficult after the fact. So we were starting with some unclean data, even though people were trying to follow the right format. And in addition to that, we were working across a number of different teams and geographies, which is something that is familiar probably to a lot of the companies that are on this call. So we were distributed geographically across time zones, across hundreds of different marketers creating campaign tracking codes. And this was a challenge of scale that we had to work with that applies anytime you have more than one person creating these codes. So at the start of all of this, we were working with about 66% of campaign codes being in the correct format. And we really needed a way to fix all of this before we moved into any other part of making the most of our campaign data. So you may be in a situation now where you're spending a lot of time cleaning up your campaigns or doing after the fact cleansing of the data before you can do anything with it. And that's the problem that we really needed to solve first. So there are a few preliminary steps to aligning on your campaign tracking code strategy. And those are to first align on the organizational priorities that you want to focus on with your campaigns, standardize from there on the common framework itself, and allow teams to easily implement tracking. And this is all preliminary to getting the most out of your data and doing any sort of advanced attribution and realizing the ROI savings and gains. So starting with aligning on organizational priorities, this really starts with asking the right questions. So rather than starting with the structure or starting with the tool, you want to start with preliminary questions such as what types of campaigns is the business running? And by campaign, we have a fairly broad definition. So the first thing that comes to mind is your external marketing campaign. So you might be running paid media campaigns, such as paid search, display, paid social campaigns, and other types of campaigns. But you might also have on-site content that needs to be tagged in a consistent format. You might be running offline campaigns, such as QR codes, press releases that appear in publications, any sort of print advertising. These are also campaigns, and this data can potentially make it into your analytics platform if it's properly tagged. So starting with an inventory, we really stepped back and said, which segments of the business are running campaigns and need to be standardized? And ideally, that's everybody that's touching the campaign. And who represents the business units involved, and are there external agencies? So inventorying that helps you get the user base that you need to align with and understand their priorities. So what campaigns, who's running them, and then what are the goals of these campaigns? A campaign is going to perform very differently if it's targeted as a direct response campaign versus an awareness type of campaign. So inventorying the goals of these campaigns allows you to make sure that your base analytics tracking is in place and you're tracking the types of events and metrics that make sense for the goals of these campaigns, and helps you refine the types of metadata that you want to collect. And then most importantly, what are the moving parts of each type of campaign? What are the things that the marketers can really change? And this serves both as the basis of your potential campaign code format, as well as the types of data and metrics that you need to collect down the line. And a lot of that may be impacted by your technical and platform needs. One thing that I considered in this case, and we consider with a lot of our clients, is the backwards compatibility of code format. So you might be at a change in analytics data collection or between analytics platforms. And how do you want to address the historical codes that have come through? Do you want to maintain that format just because it's done historically? Do you want to change formats? Or is there some sort of combination of old and new data that needs to be maintained? Additionally, you can consider whether the information about the campaigns is needed in real time within the visit for the sake of personalization and targeting, or if you can wait until after the visit closes to receive this data. And this can impact which types of information you want to make available within the campaign code itself versus in some of the associated metadata. And there are some advanced techniques through tag management that can make some of this data available earlier. So taking all of those considerations into account helps you get aligned on what you're looking at in terms of the types of campaigns and who's running them and what you hope to achieve from them. This effort can take some time, but it's worth putting in the effort up front so that everybody's aligned before you move into the next part of the process. So from there, you'll go to standardize on a common framework. And not everybody is going to wind up with the same solution. So there's not really a one-size-fits-all method for campaign tracking. And that's something that I've seen working across a number of different companies, and that's something that you'll probably recognize within yourself if you've worked across a number of different companies too. So first decision is what to include in the tracking code itself versus within the classifications if you're using Adobe Analytics, or perhaps in custom data import fields, formerly known as dimension widening, within Google Analytics. And this decision can be impacted by how human readable you want the campaign codes to be. It can be impacted, as discussed before, as to what you need to be able to access and read during the visit, and some personal preferences of the different marketers that are going to be using the data. Ideally, the campaign code is fairly short to meet the platform character limitations, and the rest of the data can be handled via different metadata solutions, but you may arrive at something different depending on the business needs. In the case that I'm talking about, we did choose a backwards compatible format for our old platform, and the code was fairly long, but it was still manageable. Also consider the platforms that the data ultimately needs to feed into and their requirements and limitations. You may be feeding the data into a downstream database, and this database may have its own character limitations and formatting restrictions. So anything that you can do on the front end to put your campaign data in the right format for the downstream platforms saves time later and can save you a lot of ETL. And another question to consider, do you want your tracking codes to be opaque or transparent to the user who's clicking on them? Do you want it to be evident that you're running a prospecting-focused campaign? Do you want it to be clear to the user that this campaign is targeted for specific dates? Or maybe you'd like to anonymize that code and make that a little bit more opaque to the user, and then just have that data on the back end. So those are all things to consider as you're thinking about your campaign framework. And there's a lot more, but these are some examples of the types of questions that you need to consider as you're having these discussions. Once you've aligned on the framework, you need to make sure that it's easy for the teams to actually implement this framework. And the easier it can be to create campaign tracking codes, the more compliance and results you'll get. So in the first question, is there a single scalable platform that all teams can use to create your campaign tracking codes? So in this case, the solution that we were starting from was a number of different Excel spreadsheets, and that's where a lot of people are working right now, is just through either a proprietary platform or manual spreadsheets that are being maintained. And so we were encountering a lot of issues with people using outdated versions of that document because it was located on a shared drive. We were encountering some validation problems and file corruption with the Excel file itself. There were very complex formulas to maintain that were taking a lot of time. And as my job as the analytics administrator, it was distracting from some of the core purposes of my job to maintain this. So we wanted a single easy place for people to go that would result in quality campaign tracking codes every time. Then next is the landing page validation process automated. So we kind of had the tacit expectation that all of the marketers running campaigns had a very detailed knowledge of analytics tracking and would be maybe testing themselves that all of these pages had the proper analytics code, or the analytics team was actually taking the time to manually test them and validate that for themselves, which created a backlog of the ability of campaigns to go live. And neither was really the ideal solution. It was honestly unfair to the marketers to expect them to have a technical knowledge of the campaign platforms and what might impact campaign tracking. We were kind of putting them in a position to fail by having that expectation. So we needed a way to automate the landing page validation process, meaning detecting the presence of the appropriate analytics code on the page, making sure that the right, in this case, the Adobe Analytics Report Suite was firing, and that the right variables were firing to track the campaigns on that landing page. And we wanted to be able to do so quickly and even allow this to be done by people who weren't familiar with very complex debugging tools. Then the next consideration, am I preventing users from creating codes that will break the URL structure? Sometimes easier said than done since there are so many permutations. Are there existing parameters already present on the URL? So if you have a question mark, are you then populating all of the future parameters with an ampersand? How are you handling anchor links in the URL? Do you have that pound sign somewhere, and is that getting translated to the appropriate location? And am I handling any other sorts of special characters that might impact the URL structure or function, such as the separator that's used within the campaign code itself appearing elsewhere in the URL, or somebody creating a tracking code that uses a symbol that has a meaning for the URL itself? So we want to make sure that users can't do things that will break their own tracking. We also wanted this process to be integrated into existing workflows. So rather than this being one more thing for marketers to do and adding this to somebody else's plate, we wanted this to be a part of daily life and as easy as possible. And then finally, how are users going to be trained, and how is compliance going to be monitored? A lot of times we hear what can't be measured can't be managed, or some variation of that. And that's also true for rolling out a new process. So we wanted to make sure that the users had training and that we were able to make sure that they were following the new process and that we were able to see distinct improvements in our campaign tracking codes. So we did this through the use of the Claravine platform, which is a cloud-based platform that has individual user logins, and we were able to monitor the fact that the right people were creating the codes that we expected, how often they were doing so, and that those were all coming into the right format. And we were able to have automated testing of the landing page URLs to make sure they were going to report properly into our analytics platform. So all of this translates to an easy process, which results in more compliance, which results in better data. So you can see our before slide from earlier where we had the number of different formats for our campaign name, for the item name, and all of the example that you saw before. And we were able to turn from this into an after state where everything was consistently in the right format across the code itself and across the different classifications and across all of the different teams. So we did this through the use of a single online platform where everybody could go and setting up all of our validation criteria, which were the result of the discussions that I mentioned before. So all of this, even though it's a lot of work on the front end, is preliminary to actually getting value out of the data. So it's worth spending the time to make sure that everything's coming into the right format so that you can ultimately translate these insights into performance. And it really boils down to what do you do with the data once you have it. And a lot of times people collect data just because they can or because it was an old requirement and it's still somehow into a document. And we don't want to just collect data because we can in our analytics platform or have a metadata point about a campaign that nobody's actually using. We want to translate these insights into real performance results. One thing that I compare collecting data to that you don't do anything with is kind of like your cloud photo storage. You just have all these photos from years and years and years ago, and you may never even look at them. And why do we really need to keep that 7th blurry photo from your vacation 10 years ago? Are you really going to use that? Probably not. So being really clear about what you can change about your campaigns is really important and what data points relate to that. And then collecting only what you need. So it's important to be clear about that. Then also, where can you view the results? Anytime that you're looking at this data, it needs to be somewhere accessible. And who is ultimately accountable for making changes based on those results? So all three of these are really important components of translating your insights into performance and using the data that you've taken so much time to make sure it's clean on the front end. So starting with what can you change, this is the result of the discussions that you had before about the different teams and their goals and what the moving parts were. So the answer to the question, what can you change, is really the answer to what to focus on in reporting. So in practice, this looks like, for example, the location of links within your emails. You might want to know whether something that's located in the body of the email is performing differently than the header or footer, for example. And you need to collect this data on the front end to then be able to report on it later. And this might translate to some type of display that you show within a dashboard. What is your targeting? Who is the campaign going to? What does your audience look like? Those are things that you can potentially change and adjust. The wording of ads, the focus, different types of images and their content, and which team is running the campaign. This might be an internal team, this might be an individual, this might be the name of the agency, so you can compare externally run campaigns to internally run campaigns. These are all things that you can change, that you can focus on, that you can report on. And these are things to consider. And hopefully all of the work that you did on the front end to inventory your teams translates very clearly into the reporting needs for each of those teams. This is also some fodder for A/B testing ideas. And that, of course, is its own entire practice area, but the what can you change also feeds into what you can ultimately test. Results that you can't see really don't exist in all practicality. So you need to find a way to socialize the location of these results. If you have a dashboard that only you look at and people that actually work with this and can change the campaigns can't see, it really doesn't translate to anything actionable. So you want to make sure that everybody knows about this reporting that you've created for your campaign data. If the right people aren't able to see it and it's not easily accessible, then all of the previous steps have been wasted. You really want to make the dashboard easy to understand. And this is another point that can be its own entire practice area, getting clean and easy to understand dashboards. But if the dashboard isn't easy to understand, then people aren't going to want to spend the time looking at it and using the data. One option is to set the dashboard as the user's home screen in your analytics tool. So it can't be avoided when they first log in. It's the first thing that they see. So that's one way to socialize it, but it can still be potentially ignored if it's just a screen that people move past. So to really get people to pay attention to the results of these campaigns, you might want to socialize them through little teaser summaries. So for example, you might create an email headline, just like you might for an email marketing campaign that says something about, check out our 25% revenue uplift from last week and a couple of key points, and then link directly to the report. So something to get people invested and excited and tell them why they should look at these things. Then, in addition to focusing on getting everyone to use this data, you want to celebrate the successes from your campaigns and highlight learnings from your poorly performing campaigns. So this can really set the foundation for your marketing strategy moving forward in terms of what worked, what didn't, learning from your mistakes, and then celebrating what went well. In addition, the dashboarding and reporting process is an ongoing one. You can't create the dashboard once and then forget about it and then realize a year later that it's no longer working and nobody's told you about it. You don't want to waste the effort there either. So just like you conduct regular data validation, you want to make sure that your reporting is working consistently and that it's bringing in the data that you expect, and that you're catching any issues with your implementation that might impact this, and that the dates of the report are updating as you expect. So these are all important points to check so that people can actually see the results and do something with them. Then the last piece, who is accountable for making changes based on the results? So all of the previous steps mean nothing if you're not taking action. So you don't want to be a situation where great analysis is going to die and nobody's doing anything with it. So rather than having everything sit in a state of inaction, you want to tie this to potential revenue wherever possible. You want to identify who pulls the levers for each type of marketing effort, who's the decision maker who can change the course of the campaign. And if you're in the position of an analyst, you can offer specific recommendations based on the data directly to the right person and follow up on what's been implemented and what happened as a result. So rather than just going and saying, hey, I think you should do this because we're seeing this in the data, and then just leaving it there, follow up with that team or that individual and create internal case studies. This was something that was very helpful in my experience in getting people invested. So think about what the goals are of the people that you're speaking with and what their own revenue targets are, what their own job description relates to, and target the reporting based on them and the way that you talk to them. And the more that you can help them succeed in their role, the more that they'll pay attention to the data that you're sharing. And this can translate into results that the whole company can celebrate. We also want to eliminate reporting for the sake of reporting. So any data point that's not consistently leading to action that people just ask about but nothing ever happens with, perhaps you don't need that. So in terms of keeping the dashboard simple and keeping the data simple, you want to continually reevaluate that. So just like you check the effectiveness of your dashboard and the other data points, you want to check the effectiveness of what you're actually collecting with the people that are consuming the reporting. And these focuses may change over time and need to be reevaluated. So you may want to do a mini version of this entire process periodically throughout the year, maybe 2 to 4 times per year, and make sure what you're showing is still relevant. So anytime you send something, think about the person that you're sending it to asking, what's in it for me? And that's not something selfish on their part, but everybody is kind of asking that question tacitly. People want to see relevant data. They want it to be personal to them, to make them care about it. And anytime you can tie that to the way that the group that you're working with is bonused or compensated, then that can really help in terms of the action that they're ultimately taking. You also want to make sure that you have a good reporting cadence. So if you overwhelm the users with excessive reporting, then they're ultimately not going to pay attention to any of it. So it helps to coordinate across different areas within your analytics and marketing teams to align on this. It's kind of a paradox of choice situation. If somebody says, which of these 24 reports should I even look at, then probably the answer is going to be none because there's too many, and you can't distill that into something that's straightforward to make decisions off of. So getting the right data to the right people at the right time is paramount. And all of this is preliminary to more advanced analytics. So I'm talking about the process of even preparing for the first level of very simple descriptive reporting, but this is all preliminary to higher levels of analytics maturity with predictive and prescriptive analytics, which isn't the focus of this webinar, but all of these preliminary steps get you prepared to do those sorts of things, as well as to do advanced attribution. And it's rare to find a company that's doing all of this really well without some concerted effort to overhaul the end-to-end process. So what did this translate to in terms of results that we were able to achieve? So the tracking code compliance, we had about 66% of codes that were even in the right format. And we had a lot of people coming back and asking, hey, why didn't this track? And they were sending it to a page that wasn't tagged or wasn't set up properly. We were able to take that from 66% compliance to over 99% by putting in place the processes that I described. So our campaign data was coming in consistently, and we were able to get classifications that we could use that were appropriately populated in all of our reporting. We also had over 60% reduction in time spent cleaning the data by the analytics team to prepare for reporting after it came in. And for those of you that have been in those shoes, you know that this can be a very painful and time-consuming process and can really distract from more impactful things that you could be doing. It's also a job satisfaction driver. If you're able to reduce the frustrating or rote work that people in technical roles are performing, their job satisfaction will increase significantly. And I can speak from experience on that. The more that you can focus on impactful work, the happier that your analytics architect is going to be. And that's a good thing for the health of the implementation and the health of the company. And this can translate to ultimately top-line revenue growth. And that's really the ultimate goal, is getting the marketing ROI. So we did see some top-line revenue growth with decreased marketing spend. And for many of our clients, we're able to see a 10 to 15% lift in return on ad spend for each additional dollar tracked. So again, making sure that you're really measuring the end-to-end process and that all of that data is getting into the analytics platform. And just another key point to highlight on that, you can socialize to all of the teams that are contributing to the accuracy of this data that by doing so, they're making it into top-line reporting and they're proving themselves as a valuable channel or offering an opportunity for improvement. So this is something that everybody can get on board with and can ultimately see their place in the process. So by undertaking this end-to-end flow, each team was able to understand their place in the marketing process and why they were important to the whole scale, just by virtue of us having these discussions and doing this training and showing how it translated into their own reporting. it's really important to get that buy-in and focus on the ultimate goal of everybody working together to get the highest return on their ad spend possible. So the steps that we took to preliminarily prepare for all of this, again, were to align on what our organizational priorities were. What did we need to focus on? And only then did we start talking about tools and technologies and the specific aspects of the way that we wanted to track our campaigns. Then we wanted to make sure that each team was able to effectuate this easily. So what could we do to prevent human error and let computers do their job and let people do theirs? Once we had all of our preliminary steps in place, we were then able to translate those insights into performance. And that started with what aspects can we change, which led to the types of reporting. Where can we view results, which is the way that we socialize the dashboards, and who's accountable for making changes based on those results. And so this is the team or group that is the recipient of each of these dashboards or reporting vehicles and what they can do as a result. So if this process is viewed as a whole and you take the time to do the preliminary steps well, the later steps are easier and you're not having to spend all of that time rethinking each of these anytime that you do reporting. So it's important to consider all of these as a whole. So I'd like to transition into a little bit about Claravine itself. And that is the company that I work for and the company that when I was on the client side, we used to do with this whole process. So Claravine is in the digital experience data management field. And what that means is making sure that you have the right data about your digital experiences to power good decisions. And we are a cloud-based marketing campaign tracking platform where you can create campaign tracking codes or any other type of data that needs very clean validation and formatting on the front end before it makes it into your systems. And ultimately, I really enjoy this process. I'm able to take my current clients through the whole thing and prevent some of the painful process of after-the-fact data cleaning and replace this with some easier-to-use tools and processes that free up everyone's time and ultimately lead to more confidence in the data. Because that's what it all boils down to, is that if people don't have confidence in your analytics data, they won't be able to make effective decisions on it, and they might even ultimately ignore the reporting, which is not a fun experience for everyone. So we love taking people from the beginning of this process with the frustration and the messy data to the end where they're able to get accurate insights out of all of this. And as someone who's done this from experience, it's very gratifying to see people move from end to end on this process. And if there are any specific questions, you're welcome to contact me directly after the webinar at asailor@claravine.com, or you can visit our site or contact our general info address, info@claravine.com, if you'd like to see a demo of our platform specifically. But I did want to leave plenty of time for your questions at the end. So at this time, I'll turn it back to the moderators to open the floor for questions.
That was great, Anne. Thank you. We do have a couple questions. The first one is, which platform did you use to create campaign tracking codes, or did you build one internally?
Yeah, absolutely. So the platform that we used was the Claravine platform, which is, like I said, the company that I brought in and that I'm now with. And so that is the cloud-based platform where all of this pre-validation took place. Before that, as I mentioned, we were using our kind of homegrown Excel generators, which the maintenance on that just became overwhelming. So we wanted to move to something that everybody could use and access, that updated in real time and fed directly into our analytics platforms. And that was the Claravine platform.
Okay. Another question. Do you work with any platforms other than Adobe Analytics?
Yes. So This is very flexible. So Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, we're able to take these same validation steps for and make sure that the base code is on the page and that the right reporting is in place before the campaigns go live. So both of those platforms, and we also work with a number of clients where we are not necessarily feeding this data directly into an analytics platform, but we're using all of the validation features to get data in a clean format, even if it's not directly connected. And then beyond that, we also work with some downstream platforms that we can push this data to, such as various database technologies, as well as some integration with things like DoubleClick Media Manager, as well as other technologies.
Okay. Another question, how long did it take to go through the setup and training process?
Yeah, so on that piece of it, it was probably a month or so just to build everything out, and then we trained the users over the course of the following several weeks. And to get from that 66% accuracy onto that 99+% accuracy was about a 3 to 4 month process, and that was made a little bit even longer than normal by the fact that we had so many users that we needed to onboard. But some of our clients did even faster than that. If it's a smaller number of users that the training's a little bit quicker, it can be even just a month or two, just time for the data to start coming in.
Great. And then what was your biggest challenge in getting all teams participating?
So a lot of that came down to the what's in it for me aspect. It's really a change management and process update at the root of it. And we were very lucky to have a project manager that helped coordinate a lot of that. And we encourage many of the companies that we work with to take that approach. So some of it was just why are we doing this in the first place? We have other places that we look at this data. Why do I need to care about what's in Adobe Analytics when it's not a core part of my job? And so we were able to overcome that by showing them what the end state would look like and how it would affect them and how they would contribute to it and how they were a part of the whole and could get recognition for their teams by making sure that their data was in the platform that was really our source of truth. So we were able to kind of overcome those process changes by emphasizing the benefits to those individual teams, as well as monitoring the compliance over time and circling back with them periodically to make sure that everybody was comfortable in the platform and using it.
Very good. Another question, can you go into more detail on how tracking validation on an LP is automated with your platform?
Sure. So I'm taking LP to mean landing page. So if that is not correct, let me know. But in terms of the validation, so as somebody goes through and enters the various details that make up the campaign tracking code, as well as the different metadata points about the campaign, such as, for example, if you're tracking the audience or other things that are pushing into your classifications, then the user enters the landing page that the campaign is ultimately going to. And we're able to test whether the page is live and loading. We're able to test for the presence of the Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics code on the page, that the correct report suite is there, and that the correct variable is firing. And in the case of Google Analytics, any custom dimensions that you're collecting data on. And so the way that works is the user inputs all of that information and gets real-time feedback as to whether or not it's correct. And in the case of the landing page, they'll get an indicator as to how many of those checks were passed. So it will say, hey, this page isn't live, or this page doesn't contain your Adobe Analytics code, and the user will be able to email those errors directly to their Adobe admin or anybody else that can take care of that. So there's an in-tool indicator for that, which can be done on an individual row level or on a massive scale as you're importing different pieces. So that's a little bit about that. And if you have any follow-up on that, definitely let me know.
Okay, another question. Is it recommended to have UTM parameters as a part of CID if we have Adobe as a tracking tool?
So you have a lot of flexibility with your Adobe Analytics implementation in terms of how you do that tracking. If you have UTM parameters that you're later concatenating into your campaign variable, that's certainly a possibility, and you can still do the classifications off of it. A lot of times people retain that if for any reason they're running both Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics, or for historical compatibility. But there's really no one right way to do it. It just depends on your individual setup. I would recommend if you're in a spot where you can cleanly transition to more opaque kind of tracking code that is less friendly named and less visible to the user, that can be very good, and that's sort of the ideal solution. But if you need that for reasons of historical compatibility or other platforms that it's feeding into, that's kind of another discussion. So that's one of those it depends answers, and there's a lot more I could say, but it really depends on the details of your implementation.
Well, this answer might be an it depends as well. What is the typical implementation time for companies?
So in terms of our solution, it's usually very quick because we're not a pixel that lives on your site. We are a pre-launch platform. So other than connecting with your analytics platforms for the sake of validation, and then any downstream platforms that you're pushing the data to, the main focus is just setting up your campaign taxonomy and all of your data validation points. And so that happens usually over the course of a couple of weeks. And from there, it's just a question of choosing a switchover date that people start using the platform and getting them trained up on it. So that process is usually pretty quick and made faster by the fact that we don't depend on any systems that would really trigger any detailed IT review. We normally go through that process pretty quickly, and we're able to get people up and running. So overall, I'd say it can be anywhere from 1 to 3 months from first inclination to start getting people on the platform to full build out and getting all the users in.
Great. Those were all great questions. That's actually all the questions that we have today. So as a reminder, I wanted to let everyone know that DAA welcomes suggestions for topics for new webinars. Your peers and I appreciate your contributions. And on behalf of DAA, I would like to thank you for your participation in today's event. And again, Anne, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. The evaluation link is posted in the chat, and it will be sent to you via the email along with the slides and the recording. So please, if you would, take a few minutes to complete that survey. This concludes today's program. Thank you very much. Have a great day.